would like the audience to remain muted during the session, unless the microphone is open for you. But please, and we do encourage you to participate through the chat, asking questions to the audience, making comments, and interact with each other. This is a workshop, it's not a panel discussion. We're here to learn from each other. We're here to present some of the learnings that the project has developed so far, but we're also here to learn from you and to help us advance the project and the roadmap for Dawn moving forward. In the end, the goal of the session is to share learnings. As a team, Dawn has been exploring a number of questions, in particular questions with regards to ethical and responsible data use throughout the project. This is a project that is kind of bringing together legacy technologies and advanced data science mechanisms to extract insights and to turn those insights into responses and answers that help create an impact for the informal workers in the market of Mozambique. But as such, there is a lot of data responsibility and data ethics that need to be taken into account, some of which the project team has already been thinking about, but some others that we hope we can share with you today, and we can learn from your own experiences to advance the project. So before we start the introduction to the solution, I'd like to make a quick intro to our panelists today. We have with us Tiago Coelho, is the founder of UX, a locally based Mozambique social enterprise that, as I said before, is leveraging digital technologies to advance impact across a number of social sectors, social economic sectors in Mozambique and Africa, in particular in verticals such as education, employment, and financial inclusion. We also have with us Carolina Medina. She's the Chief Innovation Officer at Fundación Capital. Carolina leads innovation team at Fundación Capital, where she's basically leveraging data and digital technologies. She's an entrepreneur herself, and she's been working in entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship for a long time in her career. Fundación Capital, like I said before, it has its base in Colombia, but has a mission globally to advance what they call economic citizenship around the world. Carolina has been working alongside Rodrigo Reyes, who is the Fundación Capital country director in Mozambique, and they've been leading the overall strategy and rollout of Dawn platform. Next, we have Sean Paxton. He's the head of data insights at Data Elevates, an organization that is at the heart of the data for development agenda, helping building capacity and developing data-driven insights and data science services to support social and economic development around the world. He's the data lead for Dawn project, and his work encompasses anything from data analytics across the value chain to issues related to the responsible and ethical use of data. And finally, we have Sarah McRae. Is a former product manager at Fundación Capital. Sarah, as a product manager, was responsible for the launch of Connector, the WhatsApp-based support chatbot that was launched as part of the Dawn project last year. She currently leads the strategy and methodology lead for Fundación Capital, and she'll be talking about some of the challenges that came as a result of introducing Connector in the Dawn project. So with that said, I'd like to give the floor to Tiago. Like I said before, this is a workshop. It's meant to be an interactive session. We're looking forward to your comments and to your questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. Thank you so much for your participation. Tiago, over to you.
Thank you, Jesus. Okay, so Dawn is a data warehouse and toolkit custom built by Data Elevates to generate insights and tips for the informal labor market in Mozambique. This is a country on the southeast coast of Africa, where 90% of the labor force is unemployed and lives in a survival economy. So Dawn is powered by two user-generated data systems from two platforms, Bishkat and Connector, that you see here. Bishkat is a gig work marketplace that uses mobile network legacy systems, USSD and SMS, to connect workers and clients with no internet access and at zero cost. So this service has been operating since 2016, where it currently has more than 56,000 workers throughout the whole country and has generated more than 270,000 work requests and has paid more than 1.7 million US dollars to the workers, as was reported by the clients themselves. So the professions we featured on Bishkat include maintenance services like plumbing, electricity, carpentry, but we also have recurrent services such as cooking and hairdressing. So all the activity and user-generated data on Bishkat is anonymized, and then it's shared with Dawn for data insight generation. And then on the other side, we have Connector. So Connector is a WhatsApp-based virtual assistant. It's a bot that provides tips and guidance to the informal labor force to empower them with information that helps them improve their services and livelihoods. It has features like salary benchmarking tools, CV generators, mentoring services. So Connector leverages the data that comes from Dawn to provide valuable insights and to support this economic activity that is largely ignored and misunderstood, right? The informal labor sector. So moving ahead, Dawn then for us is a project that lies at the intersection of, on one side, inclusive technologies. So how because we're using legacy systems to service the poorest with very low digital literacy, and we intersect that with advanced data science techniques, machine learning, predictive analytics to generate insights. And then we also intersect it with development ethics, because we recognize one thing, that there is an increased responsibility when you're dealing with data from vulnerable populations that have limited knowledge on issues like privacy and data security. Furthermore, we also need to be very careful with the concept of development here, which more often than not can be misaligned with the local needs, practices, and the ways that people live. So the informal labor market is poorly understood and very hard to categorize. It works more like an organic ecosystem and less like a structured activity. So we have decided to take a soft approach of presenting insights to inform workers. We provide them tips, while we ensure that we're not leading them to make decisions that can come from misunderstandings of what we're trying to tell them. And these misunderstandings often generate unintended negative consequences, and we want to avoid that. So our goal is to empower workers with information so they can take informed decisions by themselves. And with that said, I'm going to pass to Carolina to talk a little bit about these ethical concerns. Caro?
Great, thanks, Tiago, for the introduction to the project and what we've been doing together. It's my pleasure to talk to you a little bit about data and data ethics. And essentially, the way we see it is that data is power, as many would probably argue. And with great power comes great responsibility, quoting Uncle Ben, for any Spider-Man fans here. You know, we believe that there's so much that's being put on the table when you're collecting data, especially from vulnerable communities. There's more than 1 billion people across Africa that still use feature phones and that don't necessarily have internet access. And a lot of services are being built on legacy systems to provide life-changing opportunities for these people. In this process, we're gathering millions of data points, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing it in a way that safeguards and empowers the people that we're collecting this data from. And especially that, even more so, that we're not setting ourselves up necessarily to really use this data to generate insights that can not only improve our decision-making process and our impact, but also that empower the vulnerable communities that we are collecting this data from. And I know that, like Dawn, thousands of other organizations and projects, both public and private, that are also working with vulnerable communities face many of these ethical challenges in collecting, in managing, and in leveraging data for impact. So we wanted to share very broadly some of those challenges that we faced along the way We have encountered a lot of these ethical challenges with the implementation of Dawn, especially around the use of this unique data and how it opens up a world of a vastly unknown informal economy. So the first one in our minds is PII and data security. So even if we are protecting people's identities and sensitive data, we need to be very conscious about how we safeguard them. And this is a no-brainer in terms of relevance for everyone, but especially when you're working with vulnerable communities, ensuring that data is gathered and managed in a safe and ethical manner is crucial. And in our case with Dawn, we've seen that collecting people's personal identity and later information in their income, for example, or on the amount of jobs that they can be generating, could be a hazard to their own identities and their own safety. So being very conscious about how to manage that kind of very vulnerable information, or that could make people vulnerable in any case to potential theft or even gender-related power struggles, just to mention two potential consequences. We've also encountered ethical challenges around informed consent. So again, a given for many in more digital savvy segments, but for vulnerable and usually less digitally educated populations, it's actually far from a given, right? In reality, people get the really small font, legally heavy jargon, informed consent, and then simply approve and skip. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're reading it or grasping it in a way that actually is informed so that they can give that consent. So coming up with really creative ways to get that information out there so that everyone can understand it and give their consent, their informed consent, is one of those challenges. And finally, the data-driven decision-making, because as we all know, in transforming data into insights and even algorithms, and using it to shape the supply of products and services for vulnerable populations in this case, entails that whoever is behind that algorithm can actually affect the lives of millions of people. And using these algorithms in an ethical manner is something that we've been very conscious about. And I know San is going to tell us a bit more about this later, so I won't go into a lot of detail. What have we actually done to manage this great power that comes with the great responsibility of managing data? The first thing is we design with the principles for digital development in mind. So we know that data decisions are often made behind a screen, and we've made it a purpose to really connect with the users and empathize with their dreams and needs and build with them and for them. Obviously built in a collaborative manner. We were born through a data.org partnership, and that brings us together. Data Elevates, Fundación Capital, Bishkat. So collaboration is definitely at the forefront of what we do, especially thinking about the ecosystem approach. So what is that ecosystem where our users are inserted, and how can we build with that in mind? Secondly, we've also set up ethics committee and run ethics workshops so that we can make sure that we're bringing to the table these conversations. It's to no one's, I mean, everyone knows that these topics are important, right? But the day-to-day can easily take over, and we don't necessarily stop to talk about these topics and to approach them in a proactive manner. So that's what we try to do with our ethics committee and our ethics workshops. And of course, there's tons to improve there as well, but at least it's the first step toward getting there. And finally, at Fundación Capital, we've created a digital governance strategy, and we'll be implementing its subsequent program during 2022 alongside Data Elevates, actually. So we're taking this very seriously, not just in Dawn, but in every single project that we carry out as Fundación Capital, and with every digital product that we have available. Again, this is just the first steps toward making sure that ethical challenges are addressed. But we've been, very aware that being intentional and persevering about it is definitely key to making that difference. So I'll hand it over to Jesus. He'll take us through some of those other challenges we faced. And thank you all.
Excellent. Thank you, Carolina. One of the most fascinating I think things or characteristics about this project is that you see a local organization like UX super deeply involved, I guess, from the onset of this project, of this challenge, deeply involved with an international organization like Fundación Capital, and then with technical experts like Data Elevates. I think that speaks to how how localization of a solution like this has been at the forefront of the design of this solution. But I think, what's very unique about how the team, when I say the team, I mean the three organizations are approaching this, is that you're taking principles of data security, data privacy, and responsible data in general. You're considering them at the onset of the design of this. This is not an afterthought like it happens often. Things like PII or even DII. By the way, for people that don't know, PII is personal identifiable information. DII will be demographic identifiable information. These are terms that are common.
Shut the fuck up.
Oops. These are terms that are common in the responsible data language, but are not necessarily they're not necessarily being applied as thoroughly as the project is doing. And I would say one more thing before I pass it to Sean to talk about the challenges, is that by doing so, by focusing on the challenges that come with data ethics, the team is ensuring building digital trust from the onset of the design of a digital trust that is absolutely mandatory, necessary when you're building a solution for participants such as informal workers that for the most part are relying on basic mobile phones and basic core mobile technologies to access these services. So digital trust, data ethics, digital development all come together in this project. Next, Sean Paxton from Data Elevates is gonna introduce us to some of these challenges. Sean, over to you.
Thanks, Jesus. I think this is the part where we really want to start getting questions and comments from the audience. And we want to introduce two of the challenges, that very specific challenges that we're working on right now. One of which, and the first one I'll introduce, is the distribution of job requests. So just to give you a little bit of background, one of the first things we did when the project started was to look at the 5 years of historical data we had on hand from the 5 years of operation of Bishkat. Just the way Bishkat works is a client searches on the platform for a worker of a specific type in their area, and then they can request that worker's information, and they take that phone number and make a phone call and see if the worker's available to do the job. So in this case, when we're talking about requests, we're talking about a client actively requesting the contact information of a worker in their area. And we know from follow-up surveys after these requests happen that 84% of these requests result in a phone call from the client to the worker. So this is really the first step in the job opportunity cascade, or the path to an actual income for the workers. The map you're seeing here is a map of the historical distribution of requests in Mozambique. You'll see a concentration in the north part of the country in Cabo Delgado, which is a highly industrial area, has a lot of industrial economy, as well as in the south near the capital Maputo, which of course is the most populous area in the country. And these are also the concentration of our users, where our users are most concentrated. So there's nothing really surprising there. But right now, the way workers and clients are matched is when a client searches for a worker, they are given a ranked list of the workers in their area based on that worker's historical availability. So how many times they've responded to requests in the past. So that's kind of where we're starting from, and that's the status quo. So the next thing we did is let's look at, beyond the geography, let's look at the individual workers themselves and try to understand, okay, who actually is getting these requests. So I'm going to give you a few high-level data points that'll just kind of hopefully spur some discussion. And so one of the first things we did was actually bin our workers, basically put them into groups, percentiles, based on how many requests they've received over the course of their time on Bishkat. So in this particular graph on the right, each column represents 1% of workers grouped together and ranked according to the number of requests they've received in the past. And one of the first things we saw is that you see a highly skewed distribution. A relatively small number of workers, the ones that you see on the far left of the graph, receive the majority of requests. In fact, the top 1% of workers receive over a quarter of all of the requests, over 120 requests historically on average. And this potentially is a challenge because we know from user testing and from other exploration of the data that workers that do not have early success on the platform, who don't see engagement in the early days, may not stick around. They may not see value in the platform, and they may not stay engaged. So we see this as a potential challenge, and we wanted to quantify that a little bit more scientifically. One way to think about inequality, and those of you who are experienced in the development space will understand something called the Gini index. And the Gini index, or the Gini coefficient, is a way typically used to measure income inequality. So looking at where wealth is distributed in a country. What we've done is, instead of looking at the distribution of dollars or currency or wealth in a country, we're looking at the distribution of requests. Typically, the Gini index is an index. So 0 in this case represents perfect equality. So everyone has the same amount of whatever the resource is. 1 represents perfect inequality. That would be if one person, for example, had all of the requests. That would be a Gini index of 1. And that's represented here by this red line. Basically, you would expect 20% of people to have 20% of the requests, or 40% of people to have 40% of requests. So you can see there's a straight line that represents the distribution of the cumulative wealth there. The blue represents, of course, our actual distribution. And when you actually calculate the Gini coefficient for our population, we're looking at a 0.84, which is a pretty high index for inequality. So we see this as something, a metric that we want to use over time, potentially to track the way the way requests are distributed on the platform. There's a couple of things we wanted to look at. Okay, is this really a problem? Is this something, are we doing the best we can? Maybe this is ideal. One of the other things we wanted to look at was, well, we actually know from our surveys with our clients what the ratings, or sorry, we also know from the data sets what the ratings are for the workers. So workers actually, after they finish a job opportunity, are rated by the clients in 3 categories based on the perceived quality of their work, the perceived timeliness of their work, as well as the perceived value, the price value of the work. So in this case, 1 is the lowest and 5 is the highest. And this is something that the client can do at the end of the work day. These graphs here actually represent the distribution of who's, on the y-axis, you see the total number of requests that any individual worker has received. And on the x-axis, you see the actual average rating for that individual. If you expected to see people with higher ratings getting more work opportunities, which is something you might expect, you would see a more kind of a bottom left to up right, a more higher correlation between those 2 variables. Instead, what we see is that there's not really a correlation, and we've done this a little bit more mathematically than this, but there's not really a strong correlation, actually a very poor correlation between ratings and the number of job opportunities. So what we're seeing here is that the high performers on the platform, the people who have the best ratings, are not being rewarded currently under the status quo. One of the things this suggests, and one other way to look at it is, okay, let's actually look at the historical availability, which is the thing that the default sort is based on. If you look at the historical availability and then look at that relative to the number of requests, you actually see a very high correlation, which is something we expect. The default sort, the way that clients are presented to workers, or workers are presented to clients, is based on this default sort. And what we see is a very high correlation. And what this implies is that clients are not exploring much beyond the default sort. So the way that we present workers to the clients is actually the primary determinant of whether those workers get job requests. Now, as I mentioned, what this means is new workers who haven't had a history on the platform may not have opportunities to succeed. And as we mentioned, that could be bad for building our workforce. So the key takeaway here is that the matchmaking algorithm that we're currently using is driven by historical availability, but it's not rewarding people with high rankings. It's also potentially disadvantaging new workers. So now our situation is, in the coming months, we're looking at ways to potentially change our matchmaking algorithm. to hopefully to improve the experience for both clients and workers, and potentially improve the matchmaking overall. But what that means is we're actually moving job opportunities around, or moving income around. And so this raises ethical challenges for us and things that we want to consider as we're moving these things around. So I've raised 3 questions here that I'd love to hear feedback on. One, how do we balance our ethical goal with the desire to reward higher ratings, but also potentially have more equity among our workers? Should equity even be a goal, or should we just focus primarily on improving the user experience, regardless of what it means for equity? If we have remedies, or if we need to remedy the situation, how do we address them within the technical limitations of USSG, which we've mentioned is a pretty legacy system, which only allows us so much flexibility in what we can communicate to workers. And of course, are there any examples from the tech industry that have faced similar challenges, but have also taken an ethical lens or an equity lens when they're considering this? We're familiar with Uber and other matchmaking tools out there, but many of them don't really, as far as we know, don't really have an ethical focus aside from just improving total revenue for the company. So I think this is an opportunity for us to kind of ask our audience if they have any thoughts, questions, or concerns, or any things they'd like us to consider going forward. So pause there, open it up.
Sean, thank you very much. And I think while people are considering the questions that you just prompt and for consideration and for feedback, we've been very active in the chat. So not surprisingly, because this is a very, very unique discussion, I would say, not one that typically gets so much attention, and obviously one that I'm glad that we are having. So I think I'm gonna, I'm gonna be quoting some of the people that are asking some of the questions that I think are relevant to this challenge and to the next one. But if anyone that I quote would like to speak up, and feel free to unmute yourselves and ask the questions to Sean directly or to our other panelists. One of the first questions that Emily Springer was asking, and this was directed to Tiago, but either Tiago or Sean, feel free to respond. Is I would love to hear more about ensuring alignment between concepts of development and ethics. Tiago, started to talk about how the bot provides information only, but is it about the bot, taking people or using the bot to nudge people towards particular outcomes, which is what the vision of development is about. So I don't know if Tiago or Sean, you guys wanna comment, and Emily, feel free to unmute yourself if you wanna ask anything else related to that comment.
Shall I maybe then let's teamwork on this. So for us, the question here is, for instance, if we know how much an average plumber earns throughout the country, and in different regions, there's different prices being practiced. We think that this is an interesting information for a worker to have, right? Salary benchmarkings are useful in an economy where people don't know, I basically just charge for what I think it's worth. You have to understand, most of these workers don't create quotes, they don't charge by the hour, they look at the job and they'll give you an estimate. A lot of them, they have a saying here, which is the price of someone that's hungry. So I just need food to eat. That's why they call the survival economy. And I'm going to charge you just enough so I can eat today. And then by doing so, I'm not planning any evolution in my career. I'm not applying a systematic approach to charging. I'm not improving my condition by just trying to survive. So we have this information, but we also understand that this might lead to unintended consequences. So if we're telling a person, the average worker in your profession, in your location earns this much, if you're charging less or more, we're going to be leading you to a price point that might not be related to that. So we try to look, for instance, at the qualitative side, like I was seeing one of the questions here, where if you have a high quality and your price rating is considered to be very cheap, then we can provide an insight like, hey, you know what? Because your quality is so high and people are reporting that you're so cheap, you can consider increasing your fees a little bit so you can have more revenue. And so these are the types of things that for us are very interesting. It's not just finding out what this number is finding out how it can be passed to a worker in a feedback loop in a way that we're not leading them towards a decision, right? We're providing an insight based on information that we have. And what we hope is that these insights are going to be helpful for the workers to define their own path. Not so for us, it's a soft approach to development, because if I'm the worker, I'm the one that has to decide based on this information if I want to change the price or not. We're not looking at benchmarking prices. We're looking at insights that might help you succeed more or charge less so you can become more competitive and get more jobs. Does this make sense to you? And does it highlight a little bit the types of things that we're finding fascinating about this?
It is a work in progress. Thank you, Tiago, very much for that response. Something else that Emily was asking, by the way, before we move on to the next challenge, and there are some other questions. We're going to be addressing them. We just want to make sure that we have time for the second challenge. But something, Sean, that Emily was also asking is, in terms of engaging with the users and capturing their visions and I guess being equitable about how do we engage with the users and engage with their visions. What is the project? What is the timeline of the project in terms of that sort of development? And we know that a lot of the feedback that we try to get from the audience right now is going to inform future roadmap development. But can you briefly tell us what is the project right now and what are the improvements that you're planning to make basically in the near future?
Sure, and actually, as much as I would love to keep talking, I think actually I might pass this to Sarah, because I think a lot of the user testing that's been done by Fundación Capital actually really speaks directly to this. Is that okay, Sarah? Do you mind if I put you on the spot?
No, absolutely. Would you like to talk about it now, or would you like me? I think this is actually something we can come over after the information. It might give you a little bit more context as to what we were user testing as well.
Sure. In fact, if there's any other questions related to the distribution of the job opportunities, we'll field those now. Otherwise, I think Sarah we can talk about the next issue we're going to raise, which is, I think, directly related to the user's understanding of the information.
Yes, Sarah, go ahead. I mean, we have time to cover the next challenge, and then we have time to go through all the questions. And I invite everyone to keep adding comments and questions to the questions that Sean raised and to the next challenge as well, and I will be addressing them towards the end. So Sarah, over to you for the next challenge.
Okay, great. So to give a little bit of context, we've been talking a lot about bringing data back to our end users. And this has been done through Connecter. Connecter is a chatbot based on WhatsApp. And to give you a bit of an idea, this is what Connecter looks like from the main menu. So it is a chatbot that you can interact with. The design of the chatbot was also very much influenced by the user experience of USSD to make the learning curve of this tool as little as possible for new users. And from the main menu, you can have different options. You can connect with mentors, you can connect with interns, you can generate your own digital business card, make your own digital CV. But we also have a lot of data insights that we have accessible through here. So for example, if I'm interacting with Connecter, I can enter 1, and I can access benchmarking data on so median salary or payments for a specific profession per region. This, as Thiago mentioned, it's very interesting data. And with this data, what are we looking for? We want impact. We want people to be able to have empowered decision making. So from this insight that we provide, what we would like to see is that this benchmark is something that our end users can keep in mind while they negotiate more competitive payments to go beyond the survival economy. Some other data insights that are available through Connector are also, for example, the number of requests per profession per region over a period of time. So if I'm a carpenter in Maputo, I can know how many carpenters are also registered in Maputo and how many requests have come through for my profession in my region. It can help me know if I'm a rarity, so maybe I can charge a bit more because there's not a lot of competition. And particularly for young people who are looking and experimenting with different professions and different expertise that they would like to develop, it also lets them know what's missing in their local market or what's in high demand as well. The impact that we'd like to see through sharing this insight is, again, like I mentioned, having the relevance of competition when setting a price and having high demand for professions when exploring areas of work. So these are some of the data insights that we have through Connector. Of course, this is an English version made for the purpose of this slide deck. Connector is entirely in Portuguese. If we can just go on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit around the key areas of work that we go through in making these data insights accessible to the Connector users. So first and foremost, we have informed consent. So when one of our users comes onto Connector, they have to be made aware that they are going to be, that we will be collecting their data, and this data will be used also to generate insights for them. As many tech for good and in the digital development space, legal, transparent, and ethical informed consent is a challenge, and it is something that needs to be addressed. It is something that is not done adequately in many settings, particularly with legal jargon or inaccessible documents. One thing that we found with WhatsApp, which is really great, is that we can include emojis, for example. We can have longer text, so it's not as limited as USSD menus. So we were able to add that level of transparency in the data collection process. Once we have the data collection, we now go into insight generation. So this is the extraction of valuable and accurate data insights that are pertinent to our end users. So salary benchmarking, labor tendencies. This can also be about what's the time of day that the largest number of requests from BizCat are coming in, so that people can organize on when to be present and be close to their phones. So we really spend a lot of time of looking into our data about what is interesting and what is reliable, because as you know, when you're sharing data, there's also responsibility that you have, that data has to be credible, and you have to have confidence in what you're sharing because it will affect decisions that people are making. Once we have valuable and accurate data insights, we now go into data distribution. So this is the process of communicating these data insights. And as my colleague mentioned earlier, this needs to be done in a non-leading way. We are providing a tool for our end users to make more empowered decision making. We're not making the decision for them. And this is a really fine balance that needs to be done when sharing such data insights. On the side of Connector, this is something that we have tested quite rigorously prior to launch and continue to test even post-launch. So in this user testing, we work hand in hand with our end users, so with the users of BizCat, and we ask them, how do you interpret this data? What does this data mean to you? If you are given this information, how does it influence the decision that you make? And we are really working with our users to understand the influence that we are making. Through this, we adjust the way that we present the data. We can also adjust the data points that we share. So for example, rather than an average, We can share a median. But what really also comes down to is the accompanying text, the level of context that you have to provide to make the data insight understandable and accessible, but not leading your end user to a particular decision. So for our main takeaway from this is that data insight, data is an asset, and it can be shared and it should be shared with end users for empowered decision making. For us, we're looking for data to improve the services that we provide to end users, but we really stand by the ethos that data is an asset that should be shared, and it should be a closed loop. A closed loop, and it should be circular. However, how this is done requires transparency and a strong ethical framework, and rigorous user testing and close proximity with your end users. So right now we find ourselves in the moment where we're constantly monitoring the quality of our data and how it's utilized. The connector was launched in March of this year to a very, very successful launch. And as we collect more information and as we welcome more users onto our platform, we are staying very close to see the impact that it's having. I see that there have been some questions coming through. Maybe I'm happy to answer any of them that come in. There's also questions here for the audience to inspire any discussion as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. So yes, there has been some questions. There have been some resources being shared by the audience that hopefully will be helping the project moving forward. I'm going to go back to one of the questions raised by Chloe Svenke. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. But Chloe was asking, I hope the panel will consider the plight of invisible populations, groups such as LGBTQ plus persons whose identities, needs, and aspirations are largely ignored by formal data gathering institutions, or who are consolidated in using phrases like gay community, and in such a way that there are very different identities, in such a way that identities are being lost. I think what Chloe is referring to is what is the intersectional approach, if there is one that the project is taking or thinking about, as opposed to just basically, for instance, consider gender as men and women alone, which is a challenge of its own. I mean, we know that gender data in particular is a challenge. The lack of gender data is a challenge, and using that data to inform inclusive decisions and the development of inclusive insights is a challenge of its own. But Sean, is that something that you want to comment on, or Sarah?
Maybe I can just say, to my knowledge, it's not something we've directly addressed at this point. A lot of the data we do collect is through the platform, and we don't ask about. We try not to ask about, potential extra sensitive information like that. We do ask people to voluntarily give their gender preference, and I think Tiago can talk about the interface for that. But I think maybe to our partners in Mozambique, that might be a good question to talk about what maybe the vision going forward for the product.
And it's actually, to some degree, is connected to one of the questions that you were posting earlier to the audience, Sean. How do we improve new workers register if we have no background information on them? I mean, is that sort of finding that balance between, how much information do you ask in order to be as ethical and as inclusive as possible, but at the same time, how do you manage data minimization, which is one of the responsible data sort of key topics to that both development and humanitarians have to deal with. But Tiago, is that something that you want to comment on moving forward?
Yeah, so sure, I think it's an important point, and the way we do it now, we ask for gender as an optional feature for your CV. We do know that less than 50% of users actually chose one of these binary gender identifications. So the majority of users don't even think it's important to mention that. And our role is to preserve their privacy. I think it would be interesting to include more gender identities if the person chooses to self-identify a gender. And we also don't allow filtering or searching for workers based on gender. So we have all the workers are, that's not a filter that you can actually use to search for a worker. So I think in our case, what you say is right, that we need to minimize the data collection to the goal of the project. But I think now that the question is coming, you actually need to come up with solutions that you think are going to be beneficial for the workers, for the way that they self-identify. And I think we need to just research a little bit more around this and find a way to add it there. But for us, it's always just important to not make it a mandatory field. I know it's a bit running away from the issue rather than taking a standing, but I think moving forward, that's definitely a conversation that we should have. And thanks for raising that.
Carolina, I see your hands is up. Do you want to comment on this before I move on to a question for Sarah?
Yeah, just a quick add. I think that as we also think about the future of both products and how they will evolve on their own and together, we've also been giving a lot of thought to how to introduce gamification in data collection. So gamification in the sense that you only ask for it if the user is really requesting something that requires that data point, right? So it's not about collecting a ton of data, but what's specifically needed, and then hopefully transforming it into insights quickly enough so that you're not collecting that data or storing that data for longer than you should be storing it.
Excellent. Thank you both very much. I'm going to move on to a question that I think to some extent, Sarah, you've answered it through your presentation of the challenge, but Alexandra Endara was asking if you could give examples of how data is handed back to people, how is this information being tailored to make sure that it speaks to the needs of different people, be language or else, and their social realities.
Great, thank you. So there's two ways that we bring data back to people. So one is through the data insights that's generated from the DAWN database. So this is, for example, the salary benchmarking or labor tendency information that I mentioned earlier. When you go through the chatbot and, for example, you select one and you access benchmarking information, you can find it for your specific profession in your specific region. So it is very specialized data for profession and for region. There's another way that we do it, which is, as Carolina mentioned, going more towards a gamification. So this is by generating rapid and very individual insights. So this is done through what we call a series of business management tools. So these are tools that is our intention to help in business management and as they work about their day. So for example, one would be a profit margin calculator that we have developed. So it's by entering your costs, so the cost of transportation, the salary that you may have paid for other colleagues on a specific job. It can be the cost of materials that you have put in. So listing basic costs and then asking, and then how much did you get paid? So really instantly bringing out the profit margin. And when we were creating this tool, for example, a lot of our users, a lot of our testers, when we were creating this tool, said that they realized through this process that they were actually not profitable on many of their past gigs, on many of their past contracts, because they were not taking into consideration all these different cost drivers. So this is a type of data that is instantly calculated for them. On our hand, it's interesting because we have more insights into the cost drivers. So over time, as we collect more information, we might be able to put those cost drivers on the same level as we're currently communicating other information, such as the salary benchmark or the job tendencies as well. to say these are typical costs associated with your profession and in your region. So a lot of these business tools, we want them to have immediate utility for our end users and immediate data feedback. And then on our hand, it's also an opportunity for us to increase the insight that we have into the informal economy. I think I forget the second half of that question. Can you remind me, Jesus? Oh, pardon me. I cannot. I think you believe you're on mute.
The second part was how is the information being tailored, and how do we make sure that it speaks to the social realities of and the personal realities of the people that are we trying to support.
Okay, great, thank you. So all of the content on Connector is in Portuguese. Portuguese is widely spoken in Mozambique. We recognize that it's not a language that everyone is comfortable in our target market, but for the time being, it is in Portuguese. What's great with chatbot technology is that you can have multilingual interfaces as well. And as we go forward in the product, it is a possibility that we can look into in including it in other languages as well. We include actually a lot of emojis in our text as well to make it as visual as possible for semi-literate populations and who feel more comfortable with images. So we use that for direction as well. In terms of creating the content, it's all created hand in hand with our colleagues in Mozambique who translate it and make it accessible to our end users. And through rigorous user testing, we validate that the content is understood and how it is understood as well to make sure that it is reaching the intention that we would like. So these are some of the approaches that we use to making that content accessible and understood.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, everyone. We are unfortunately running out of time, but we made, I think, a very good use of our time with an excellent exchange with participants, comments, resources being shared, questions being asked. I think more questions and more answers are needed in this discussion. One thing that I wanted to mention, I don't know if you realize, but this being a development assistance project is actually using a lot of principles of humanitarian, responsible humanitarian data use, such as those from the Signal Code to do with the right for information, data privacy, the right for data agency as well. It's pretty fascinating to see how a project like this is really thinking about these issues from the start, and not basically waiting for issues related to data misused to happen to then try to kind of put a solution to that. So certainly more conversations to come. The team is going to put together a summary and an insights from this discussion that they will be sharing in LinkedIn and in the form of a post. I believe Sean is going to share with you some LinkedIns to follow them, to follow the organizations, and to make sure that you can keep adding to this fascinating conversation. So I'd like to thank everyone, all the participants in the workshop, all the audience, and yeah, looking forward to stay connected and to help Dawn platform, Dawn solution to reach the sustainability and the scale that is needed for the market of Mozambique, and who knows, maybe beyond. Thank you so much, Thiago, Sarah, Sean, and Carolina. Thanks everyone, and speak to you all soon.